As you probably know by now, I thought that your film, Julia, was one of the finest films that I've seen this year, and your performance, as I stated in my review, is definitely an Oscar-worthy performance.
Thank you.
Julia is essentially about friendship. How important is friendship to you?
I think it's very important. Commitment to another human being. In this particular movie, it transcends, I guess, what you usually think of in terms of friendship. It is a very deep, emotional and spiritual commitment to another person, and I think what friendship is being able to sense the needs, the emotional needs of another person before they ask you to do that, and to be able to address their needs. And that's a lot of what the movie about Julia is about, and challenging each other, good friendships, challenging each other to be better people, braver people, to extend yourself further.
In Julia, however, I'm going to start this over again. I don't know why I lost my train of thought. You caught me for a minute. I wanted to say, in Julia, you perform some deeds that are really kind of way out. Do you think that if you had a friend, that you could do the exact same things that you did for your friend in Julia, that you would do for your own personal friend? For example, in Julia, you carry money to her, and you know that it could mean, if you are caught, your life, her life, etc. Would you jeopardize your own life for friendship?
That's a big hypothetical question. It's difficult to know. You know, the story of Julia takes place at a very specific time in world history. It's the beginning of Nazism. It was the rise of Hitler to power. And at times like that, I think people rise to tremendous heights of heroism. You know, in the 70s, it's a little bit hard for a lot of people to think of risking your life as a Jew. Lillian is a Jew who goes into Nazi Germany with this money to try to help political prisoners get out. We're not confronted by anything like that today, so that's why it's a huge if.
But you confront...
I would risk my life for my children and my husband. I would like to be able to think that I would risk my life for the ideals that I believe in. And I guess that my friends represent those values to me, too. I've never been put to the test. I would like to think that I would be capable of that kind of courage.
Weren't you frightened, Jane, at times during the 70s when you were stopped at airports, when people booed at you? The reason that I ask you this is that you've been quoted as saying that you have never really experienced fear, and I find that rather difficult to understand.
There were some hard years, and of course now we know it wasn't just paranoia. I have my FBI file. It stands about this high off the ground. It's about 4 or 5 feet up there, and it's taller than my son, who's 4. And you know, it's quite disturbing to see what was done during the Nixon administration to people who opposed his policies. But it made me mad.
You weren't frightened for your life?
No, but what was done to me was, you know, I mean, being famous, being white, being upper middle class, my mail was open, my home was broken into, my phone was tapped, undercover agents came into my life. It made me mad, but there were people who were shot at and who were kidnapped and who were threatened with a lot worse than me, and if that had happened to me, I think I would have been terrified. You know, my husband was beaten and lived in much more of a violent situation than I did. I think just because of who I am and where I live.
You don't think that could have happened to you, though?
I think that if Watergate hadn't been exposed and if Nixon had been allowed to have his way, I think it could have happened. Yes.
How do you use fear? How do you use it in a film? Because throughout most of Julia,
I'm frightened.
You are frightened. And if it is true that you have said that you've never really experienced fear, how do you use it in a film? What do you call upon?
Well, I think one of the things that I learned is that you have to play against the obvious, you know, the tension and all that, and try to put yourself into the situation. You know, try to really understand what it means. You're a woman. You're alone. You don't know who is around you. You're Jewish, and try to become so relaxed that the reality of the situation will take over. And because the script was well written, it was easy. Also because we had a brilliant director.
No, I somehow feel, Jane, that knowing you, that you have to call upon some experience to make you relate the way you did, because you truly came off as a very frightened human being. And I don't think it's just technique. I think somebody like yourself has to call upon something within yourself to make that so real.
Well, I suppose so. I've never had a friend like Julia either, and yet I think that my love seemed very real. And again, it goes back to acting. It's you know, if the story's been well laid out, and if you feel strongly about the situation, and if you understand your character well enough, you just, you know, you become, I guess. It doesn't always happen, but in this case, it was easy because I felt real strongly about the situations.
Jane, you grew up in Hollywood, certainly surrounded by many, many famous people. Does it tarnish your view on friendship? Can you have a friend in this community? And do you have one?
Mm-hmm. I have a friend. Matter of fact, she's Lillian Hellman's goddaughter. She was the person who suggested that I do Julia, and she's now a vice president at Warner Brothers Studios. Her name is Paula Weinstein. She's certainly part of the Hollywood world, and I love her very much, and there are other people here that I love a lot. I think that it's hard, though, and I don't think it's unique to Hollywood, but you have here, you know, all the millions of people who watch your show. You know, it's hard to communicate to you what it's like in a business where you become so famous so quickly, and consequently a lot of power goes along with it. You can lose it very quickly, too, in this industry, and it's very, very competitive. So there's a lot of suspicion, and, you know, all of these things tend to put walls between people, you know, and it's very hard to hang on to humanity. Well, you know, as a performer, I think what you have to do is...
as a person,
be
Jane.
super, I mean, as an actress, what you have to do when you're in this kind of a position is you have to be real clear about who you are. You're just, you know, where you came from.
Jane, do you know who you are today?
Yeah, I feel like I know who I am. And as long as you're, you know, you maintain your humility and a sense of reality amidst all the
Do you consider yourself
buttering up that goes on.
Do you consider yourself today upper middle class, a privileged person? What do you consider yourself?
Certainly, when you make movies and you're, you know, you have that kind of mobility and salaries, ridiculous kinds of salaries, you're in an extremely privileged position. The way I try to deal with that is I try to use the money that I earn not for my own gain, but for the building of organizations and movements that will try to make us have an economy that's better for the life of average people. And I live very simply. You know, we don't live in Hollywood, and we don't live like most movie stars, and that makes me happier as an artist, as an actress, because I feel that I have a little bit more understanding about the kind of hardships, realities, just day-to-day things that women have to deal with. You know, if you have children and you work. If I look tired, it's because I had to get up at 7 this morning and I had to feed my kids the way most women in the country do. But there's this tendency when you get money to not have to deal with those realities. So then how act? How to perform? You know, you're right in a sense that you have to know, you have to have experienced some things to be able to.
Are you happy you had
portray
your
them.
children?
Am I happy that I had my children?
Yes.
Oh, very much, yes. I wish I wasn't so old so I could have many more.
Do you?
I started too late.
Oh, you were not that late?
Yes, I was. I was 32 years old.
You're just about 40 now, right,
Yeah,
Jane?
yeah. And I'd like to have a few more children, but it's hard now.
You know, we all talk about age. A lot of people seem to be preoccupied with growing older.
I know, it's such a shame.
Being 40, does it disturb you?
No.
Has your life changed? Do you feel any different?
My life has changed a lot. I was very scared when I was 30 because all I had in my life was my youth and worrying about career in that. My life is fuller now. I have a family. I'm happily married. I'm not just living for the narrow self of Jane Fonda. So I view age as a chance for wisdom, and I'm happy to say that in fact you can grow wiser as you get older, avoid some of the mistakes of youth. I like the way elderly people are treated in some countries, and I wish that could be more true here, you know, where a great deal of attention is paid to older people. We listen to them carefully to learn from them.
When someone looks at you, sometimes one thinks of truly a rebel. And being a rebel, one doesn't think that someone like yourself would go back to so-called middle-class values.
I am a rebel.
But you're also middle class?
I have a job that is very difficult to render socially responsible. I am a rebel in the sense that I refuse to accept the values that are held out to me. In other words, the values that seem to go along with being rich and famous. However, I believe in the family. I believe in a family unit. I believe in raising children properly.
I was just going to ask you, that was the whole point. Why did you get married?
I got enough problems. There's more things, important things that I could be having to, you know, to defend than why I had children and not being married. I think it's fine for, you know, for some people, but I have to, you know, you have to say what's important in your life. My relationship to my husband didn't change, and it would be the same married or unmarried. Although marriage, I think it is somewhat of a deepening of a commitment. It's harder to walk away when there's a problem if you're married. But, you know, I'd rather talk about why there aren't enough jobs for people than why I had children out of wedlock, if you know what I mean.
Which you have done? No?
What, having children out of wedlock? No.
Oh, Vanessa did. Well, I'm sorry. That's right. Roger Vadim, your husband, said that he felt that he lost his wife to a political cause. Was he correct in that assumption?
Not really. Not really, although when we separated, it was in 1968 and 1969. It was a time of, you know, tremendous social turmoil. You know, great movements were stirring, not only in the United States, but in other countries. And what that meant was that on a personal level, you know, as a woman, if you felt that your life was not as full as it should be, if you were really not tapping your full human resources, it was easier then to look around and see that there were people out there that were really that had belief, that had courage and commitment, and were really using their lives for something. And you know, if I had felt perhaps, you know, more complete internally, I wouldn't have. I wouldn't have.
Sought something on the outside?
Well, I know I would have been against the war, but. I was more than just against the war. I have completely changed. I've changed the way I live. I've changed very, very deeply. And that probably would not have happened, you know, had the personal element been, you know, been fulfilling for me. So in a sense, you know, it's half true and half not true.
We talk about friendship. Do you think a man or your husband can be your best friend, and is he?
Yes. Someone asked me the other day if I had a friend like Julia, and I had to say that my Julia is my husband. He's as close as... And by that I mean, as I said in the beginning, a very, very close person who not only respects you individually, but challenges you to be a better person. I think that's very important.
Who do you think was the one person most responsible for making you socially aware?
My father, I think. Although, you know, would say, well, how does a rebel daughter then get influenced by Henry Fonda? And my father has tremendous social consciousness, always has. He's always been a man of incredible integrity. And my memory of growing up in Hollywood was watching him never get caught up in the treadmill of Hollywood values and of sort of superficiality. He was very much on the outside of that, and that because I had always tremendous respect for him. That rubbed off, I think. He's a very strong person.
But Jane, it's also a well-known fact that you and your father never had the greatest of relationships, I guess until maybe recently. You had your differences of opinion. You went your way, he went his way. He said some things about you in those beginning days when he said he did not understand what his daughter was all about, although he said he would support you. But it was sort of those kind of strange things that fathers say because they don't know what to say. So how can you say this about your father making you so socially aware when I really have the feeling that he really wasn't around to even tell you what to wear?
Oh, wait a minute, I don't understand what that... I think the point that you made that I'd like to address myself to is, if he had such an important effect on me, why were there so many differences during a particular period? And you know, these were differences that I think took place among millions of families in the United States. My father was a Second World War veteran. Easier for younger people to have viewed the war in Vietnam with horror, which I think we should have, that it was a travesty for our country to have been doing that to another country, and for the reasons that we were doing it. But men who fought in the Second World War, when our country was fighting against fascism, how hard for them to, because now, you know, they were getting older, harder when you're older to question. It meant reopening and questioning whole parts of our history as a nation, and questioning why we go to war. My father, by 1970, had very much turned against the war, and in his way took very brave positions. He did television commercials against the war. He spoke out. You know, his way of doing it was a little different than mine. I think that's a generational thing. But what's important is that, I mean, it's just an historical fact that at a time of such divisiveness around something like the war, that parents and children argue, and when you're famous, it's on television. What's important is that times have changed, and that with the ending of the war and the much learning about the realities of the war with the Pentagon Papers and the exposing of Watergate, those kind of family wounds have healed, not just for our family, but for all those other thousands of families where parents and children can understand each other and talk about it.
I guess what I'm also saying, we'll get off your father for a moment, is, was there, though, one individual who took you by the hand and said, Jane, I want you to lead this cause, I want you to lead that cause, I want you to go here, and I want you to speak out against this? Yeah. Who was responsible for that? How did you suddenly, you know, pick yourself up and take yourself out of the mainstream of acting and become a political spokesperson?
It's a complicated change. Real change is a complicated process to describe, but to try to do it briefly, I was living in France with my then husband, Roger Vadim, and I began to see things on French television, American bombers bombing churches and hospitals. I don't think this kind of footage was shown in this country. I began to talk to American servicemen who were in Paris, and what I began to hear about what was going on in Vietnam, and then I began to read the Bertram Russell War Crime Tribunal, various books that were written by people who'd been in Vietnam, and I went from someone who, if a foreigner came up to me, and frequently Frenchmen, you know, France had fought in Indochina, so they had a particular reason for watching what was going on, and they'd say, well, what do you think about your country destroying a village in order to save it? And I would become very angry and defend the country and what it was doing. And, you know, I really believed, as my father did a few years later, I said, it's impossible for the United States to do to do these. So when I began to find out that, in fact, we were bombing civilian targets, and there was torture, and there was killings of civilians, and there were things going on that I felt really betrayed the people of this country, I really said to myself, I believe in the people in my country who are trying to stop this, and I will go home, and I will get on the phone, which I did, and I called Sam Brown, who's now head of the Peace Corps in Washington, and I said, I'm Jane Fonda, what can I do? And he told me that there was a demonstration in a particular place. And, you know, one thing led to another, including the problem of having to be an immediate expert. Again, the problems of being famous. Instead of, you know, learning slowly, I had a lot of cramming to do because I didn't know enough in the beginning. But what I learned in the process of trying to end the war was that there were so many people in this country who really had given up so much in order to fight for the values that we think the country should represent, which essentially is democracy and the Declaration of Independence. And it changed my life.
Jane, do you think you've been manipulated by men?
Manipulated by men. I wish I had a funny line to Not particularly. I mean, I think, you know, it's sort of our social values, our culture that tends to, less now than when we were, you know, deciding what we wanted to be as women,
Let me ask you
telling us
something.
what we were supposed to be. It was more that.
When you were living in France and you were married to Vadim, were you personally happy with
No.
yourself, you,
No.
Jane?
No, that's what I said earlier. That's why I was open to change. I was not happy.
What were you looking for, though? What did you feel was missing in your life?
Life. Life.
Do you think you could have
Some
been caught
kind of-
up in the Hollywood storybook that life was to be a certain way with a picket fence around your house and beautiful people and lots of money and anything you ever wanted, never
No,
having to
because
want
I could have
anything?
had that if I wanted that. I never was very much a part of the Hollywood scene. Always had a hard time. I just always felt that I was kind of boring and out of it because I'm not good at cocktail parties and I don't like small talk, and I never felt that I wanted to spend that much time the way I looked. So I just sort of thought, well, I'm a kind of a renegade, but you know, that's the way you're supposed to be, so I'll sort of try to make do. And it was always sort of being out of focus with the values that you felt were the ones that you should share, but you didn't, you know? And so it really was after, when I was in another kind of a context, in a context where other kinds of priorities besides status and position and looks and all that matter, that I really, and I was not young anymore, that I really felt that I'd come home.
How do you feel being back in Hollywood, considering just 7 short years ago, this town was booing you and hissing at you for
Well, let's
taking
not
the political...
exaggerate. This town was not booing and hissing me.
Yes, there were many people in this community who were, Jane, you could not get jobs the way you should have been
I
given
did not.
jobs, right?
That's right. I didn't get as much offers. Some of it had to do with the fact that people like J. Edgar Hoover had sent memos saying that I was raising money to buy guns for the Black Panthers and that I was leading chants calling for the death of Nixon. I mean, there was a job done on me. And despite that, I did work, not as much. There was concern as to whether or not the Nixon maneuvers and my political stands together would hurt my box office. But the 70s were not the 50s. I never felt that the studio heads and the people really caved into Nixon.
But you did feel a freeze on you.
I felt that it was getting chilly, put it that way. It was chilly, but it was not the deep freeze that there was in the 50s. But it was chilly, and I have tremendous confidence in the American people. See, I think history is on the side of what's right, and that time will out, and I'm right, and I'm here. Nixon's not here. You know, I'm working. He's not. What can I say?
And husband Tom has obviously decided that working within the framework of the establishment is obviously the better way to go than being the rebel and the radical that he was.
No, he is still. He has not changed. Times have changed. In the 60s, someone who was opposed to fundamental policies of the government had to protest from the outside because we were not allowed in. Times have changed. Tom Hayden can run for the Senate in California and get 1,200,000 votes. He almost won. That's an indication that it's not just a narrow group of protesters who support progressive ideas, but a major section of what Nixon might have called once the silent majority, who, you know, it's something that Tom said when he was running for the Senate, the radicalism of the 60s has become the common sense of the 70s. That's what's changed. I haven't changed. My husband hasn't changed. It's that people we are not stupid. We are a smart people, and we are a good people. And when we recognize that we've been lied to and manipulated, we say enough already. Let's proceed in another direction.
If you had to make the choice between acting and being a political leader, which one would you choose?
I hope I don't have to make the choice. Right now, acting.
When you've gone out to make speeches on behalf of your husband, you've been a very, very effective speaker. Why don't you run for political office?
Because I'm an actress, and you can't do both.
Would you like to be?
You can't run for office and be an actress. I'm leaving in a few hours to go to Nebraska and talk about democracy on a campus. I'm a political activist. I'm involved in an organization. I have not been sort of co-opted into the Hollywood system. The day may come when I'll be too old to make movies, and in that case, if it's necessary, I would consider running for office, but that's not the reality right now in my life.
How would you feel if you ever became First Lady of the United States?
Oh, oy vey. That probably says it all.